everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Adventures in Machine Learning. I'm one of your hosts, Michael Burke, and I'm joined by my co-host,
Ben Wilson.
And today we are going to be talking about an applied ML use case. Today on the show, we have Ruslan Hamidulin. He is currently based out of Lithuania. I actually have a good buddy from there, so small world. And he has a bunch of experience in iOS development, over 10 years. But he recently transitioned to a new project called Film Use Stage. And Film Use Stage parses film scripts to determine things like location, props, sounds, costumes, and it sort of classifies those into different groups. And then from there, you can use a scheduling feature that helps you manage the location and times of shoots. And then that has some nice features like external tags from Google Maps. So Ruslan, how did you get into this project?
Damn easy. We just started it back to 2018, so I'm one of the co-founders, and basically my friend came to me with the idea like what we can do to improve the processes in the filmmaking, what can we do better. And I got some experience in development as well. I started to really dive deeper into the machine learning, and we came out with the idea like, okay, we probably can start a company, create a startup, and finally do it. So here we are.
Got it. And I know you have a background as a musician and a sound engineer, but do you also have a passion for film, or was this your friend's idea?
My friend is a filmmaker, but I'm also a huge horror movie fan, so I always was interested in movies, okay, and trying to find my way deeper into the industry finally.
Got it. Do you have a favorite horror movie?
Exactly. Yeah, sure. It's the Thing, John Carpenter's The Thing, 1984. Mm. It's, by the way, the best movie ever shot.
Lots of practical, gross out effects in that one.
Yes, yeah. Absolutely beautiful.
Got you. All right. So I wanted to sort of use this as a potential case study for understanding how you use machine learning in an applied setting to solve some real world issues. So I was wondering if you could elaborate a bit on sort of the model stack that you're using.
We started with an idea that we probably don't want to stall the creative part of the processes from the people. Like, we ain't gonna judge the material, we ain't gonna generate text or something like this. We just want to replace manual routine, not very fun job for the professionals. So script breakdown is pretty much it. So basically you take screenplay and you have to break it down into pieces and then extract words and copy paste it or write it down to somewhere, like your cast names, your props, your location details, etc., different categories of meaningful types of objects. So it sounds like a perfect task for machine learning, especially named entity recognition. So at that moment when we started to develop, Google BERT was just released, and we picked it as a entry point. Well, created a data set, which is usually 95% of your efforts, and started to train and actually got really good results on top of that. So yeah, that's it.
And how did you create that initial training set?
Well, we started by ourselves, actually, introduced a format, how we want it to be marked down, got some special sauce on it. And we hired a team of students from a university, next block, paid some money. So, and we ran a few rounds of dataset creation, and this was our initial data set. So basically always the same. You develop the structure, hire some people, or do it by yourself. Now it's super easy actually to do it. You have solutions like Prodigy AI, or how is it called? Yes, really solid tool for markdown. So that's it. And then when you launch, actually you start to get data from your users, and this is what makes your data really nice, really accurate.
Got it. And yeah, it's pretty common to outsource the creation of these data sets, whether it be via Mechanical Turk on AWS or just hiring some students.
Mm-hmm.
Both can be pretty effective. Did you actually go in there and yourself label a lot of data, or did you outsource all of it?
Like me personally, of course, we did like a huge percent of job actually just to understand, to get the field. Once we understood like how it works, where we have sharp corners, we just outsourced it and became kind of moderators, like taking decision and yes, basically judging what changes we accept and what not. So there was no platform like Prodigy AI back then, so we had to create like our custom front-end application just to process the data sets and get the data labeled. So actually creating the tools for the labeling took us more time than the data set creation.
So did you design the sort of reinforcement loop into that front end from the get-go?
Well, yeah, some kind of. It was really easy, but yes.
So that's an important thing for listeners of the podcast to think about when you're trying to do this stuff for real. A lot of people play with open source data sets that are already clean and relatively perfect.
Mm-hmm.
And people are, if you go through training like that, and that's what you've learned how to apply ML by using data sets like that, sometimes you don't think about, hey, what if the data's not that good? At least your first pass. How do I make it better? What is that process of retraining and continual feedback? I think that's really great that you thought about that ahead of time and said, there's no free data source out there for this problem. We have to create it all.
Like nothing, zero. And like as I mentioned before, the generation of data set is like 95% of your efforts, actually.
And continuing efforts too. I mean, if you want to continue to make your product better, it's a never-ending battle.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
So even with the structure of a movie script that you, or a stage production that you have coming in to go through the tool, are there conditions where somebody just submits something to that you don't have parsing logic set up to process that, and you have some sort of fallback mechanism?
We do have some fallback mechanism. So first of all, the screenplay format varies a lot across different productions and, say, screenwriters. There are probably some widely adopted screenplay formats, but in most cases you just get what you get. So we created a sort of algorithm of extraction, the data of exactly what we want to label actually, and that was the tricky part, to be honest. Then we created a data set for name entity recognition on top of that, and now we're actually moving towards another layer of complexity, going to create a new way of PDF recognition as an intersection of OCR and text recognition, like to get actually to be able actually to recognize like any imaginable format.
If you're getting a script before production's even started, before casting's even completed,
it's like the first point when you have like final draft of your screenplay. It's when you actually start to plan things, like you need to understand what's inside and have some kind of really raw estimation, like your draft budget, draft schedule, draft whatever, just to go to pitch the project, basically.
So at that point, you don't have a composer lined up. You don't have an idea of like who's going to score this thing.
Yes.
Do you do something like a sentiment analysis of different sections within the script to say this is the mood and the theme that would most align to the content of the scene?
Well, not at the moment, but we're definitely planning to do something like this. And also we have a partner company called Melod AI from Australia, who actually provide AI generated music and score for particular mood and atmosphere and whatever. And our plan is to like assemble a whole bunch of companies like we are and create some kind of infrastructure, connect the client with the providers, with vendors, different types of, say, location agencies, cast agencies, props warehouses, etc.
Interesting.
Yeah, that's a really smart use case. Everybody will specialize in whatever area of strength that they have, and then you guys can
Yeah,
all work together and sort of make 1+1 = 3. Uh, that's a really
hopefully.
interesting, business use case, though. How would the logistics of that play down?
I have no idea yet, so we have to figure it out. So the logistics will probably the most difficult part, because in filmmaking as well is in any physical production, the respect and the cooperation and basically trust to the real person means a lot. I'm not sure yet if will be how can we like what should we do about that.
Got it. Yeah. So I also was curious about how you sort of moved from iOS development, which you have over 10 years of experience in, into this ML world.
Well, to be honest, it's AI world is much more challenging than mobile development. Once you hit the ceiling, you kind of not much else to do. So I was looking for something more. Especially, I was deadly tired of working on contract or be employed by someone. Just wanted to kickstart something on my own. So, and at the proper time, I met proper people, and we decided that okay, let's do something about this. Startups were really on hype back to 2018, and we thought like, okay, if someone can do this, probably we also should try.
Got it. And how did you select BERT as your main algorithm?
Well, it's a good question actually. I don't remember how we selected BERT, but it was so obvious solution, like got the best metrics at that moment, I believe. And the ease of use and actually the level of documentation was good enough for us to start.
Got it. Yeah, Ben, how do you think about selecting a model for, let's say, a use case like this?
If we got into a time machine and went back to 2018, I probably would have come to the exact same conclusion that Ruslan did, with reading the docs, reading a couple of examples, testing it out on some data sets, and probably would have been like, this is so much more advanced than anything else that's out there. Let's just use this. Now there's, go to Hugging Face Transformers Marketplace and look at how many versions of BERT there is, how many
Yes.
versions of all these different sentiment models and classifier models. And,
Absolutely.
tell me what the next word should be in this sentence. NLP solutions. I think it's harder today to make a decision on what path to go on based on total amount of time. So I think you need more discipline now in order to restrict the things that you're going to be searching for. Check the most popular things, and then check one or two things that seem to be more highly tuned and specific to your use case that you're trying to do. Do that research, evaluate just a few things, and then just go with something that works. Because
Yes.
right now you go to that site and look at the marketplace, and you're like, okay, there's 557 pre-trained language models. Which one do I try? It's daunting.
Yes, that's true. But as for me, data set is still more important than like particular model, because you get difference in like in percent or sometimes in fractions of percent. But the cleanness of your data set, it's really what matters.
100%. And then from a model perspective, I think it's also important, if selecting a pre-trained model that you're going to fine tune, is to look at the structural components of it. How many inputs does it have? How deep is it? A really quick and dirty sort of nasty way that I make that selection, I just download the model of a pre-trained model and I just save it to Object Store. and I just look at how big it is on disk with the native serializer. And some of these are, 2 gigs. You're like, okay, that's big. If I retrain that, it'll be somewhere around that ballpark in size. Other ones, you're like, okay, that's 55 gigabytes. Well, when that's in memory, when you're going to be doing retraining, how much longer is retraining going to last? That size of that model too, the input count, that dictates how much data can actually go into the model for inference. So with NLP, you truncate a lot, but you have to. So
Yes.
how does truncation work? Are you losing context? Do you have to do a bunch of pre-processing in the tokenization steps?
Exactly.
There's a lot of stuff to think about.
But at the same time, when you work with text, you definitely want to have as much context as possible. So the size of memory matters a lot.
So you need a budget to run it on if you're going to retrain.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, speaking of, how do you retrain?
Actually tried multiple approaches, like from local machines with powerful GPUs. Nowadays, I'm just using Google Colab. It works just wonderful with premium subscription. They trying to charge more and more, but still the best.
Got it. And do you have any sort of passive retrain technology via drift detection or anything like that?
Well, we are in the process of implementing this and experimenting this, to become it more independent.
And I saw that you guys use GCP for basically your entire stack. Is that because of Google Colab, or is it because of backend processors, or why did you choose GCP?
It's so obvious, also, I don't know, these days. Well, also, actually, I started with AWS, I believe. I was kind of intimidated with the complexity of the platform and how difficult it was to actually start and implement and make something finally work. I came from the world of iOS devices when everything works super smooth and you don't spend much time actually making things run. When I started to develop for AWS, so man, I spent 2 weeks literally trying to launch some super basic setup, and then and also 2 weeks of collaborations and meetings with support team, which literally led to nowhere. And then I just tried to do the same on Google Cloud Platform, and I just in a couple of hours I got a really raw and easy project running. So for me it was a match. It really expensive, to be honest. I'm actually thinking to switch to some more safe approach, maybe DigitalOcean or something else, when you start to scale and when your startup program ends, you find yourself in a difficult situation actually.
Yeah, and just for the listeners out there, one of the basically main tenets that Databricks subscribes to is there's 3 core clouds that we work with: AWS, Azure, and then Google Cloud or GCP. Mm-hmm. AWS is by far the most mature. It's been around for about 11 or 12 years and has 33% of the market share. And then Azure has been around for about 5 years and has roughly 22% of market share. And then GCP has been around for a little bit longer at 6 years and has 9% of the market share. But often being the first mover, there's a lot more growing pains. And when you're starting a company, you want to be the last mover and have the most effective tech stack. So GCP and AWS and Azure, they do the same thing, but they have different UIs and different interfaces. So it's interesting to see that Ruslan is going with GCP, because a lot of our customers are on AWS or Azure.
Yeah, and how you can compare it? What's your opinion?
I'll defer to Ben on that one.
Most certainly, no comment. I think they're all wonderful, and they're all great partners of ours. So,
okay, gotcha.
if you're using the native systems that they offer, I think each one has a different appeal to a different subset of engineering teams out there, and they were all designed and came about from slightly different places. Mm-hmm. So AWS grew out of the Amazon core business needs for their backend, and then they said, "Hey, we built all this cool tech. Let's sell it and have infrastructure,
make some extra money."
And then all of a sudden, whoa! It's making all the money. And then Azure is, I think it was coming at from a perspective of looking at users who would need to migrate extremely large deployments from on-prem to the cloud and make it as similar to what their on-prem experience would be. Whereas AWS, when you make that shift, it's jarring almost because it's so different than how you would run everything on-prem. And then GCP is more the Google philosophy. Like, let's make the customer user journey for what we need to like do to get something to work. Let's make that as integrated as possible and simplify things.
That's true.
So I'm a fan of all three for different things.
It makes sense that GCP would be pricey if it's a sort of the more integrated and simple approach, and you can get less low level and customize.
I think they're realizing what people can do on the platform, or they're seeing what people are doing, and they're like, okay, now people see the value of what we do, and the buzz is rising away from that level of just fascination that people have. And as we talked about last week on the podcast, we're like, oh, we're talking about ChatGPT and these large language models. Ruslan, you've been dealing with large language models for years now. Other companies have been doing it for years or decades. So to people that have been doing it, it's not, when something like that comes out, people aren't like, whoa, that's amazing. It's like, no, that's cool. It's the next iteration in these things, but we've been doing this stuff too.
We knew it coming. Come on.
Yeah. Speaking of, what do you think is next in the large language model iteration, or just NLP in general?
It's a damn good question. I guess we are some sort of pinnacle, kind of hard to predict what next. I never thought about it actually. Maybe you have something to add. What's your point on that? What do you expect?
I'll always defer to Ben. So for context, Ben has like 3,000 times more experience in the ML world than me and has worked with hundreds and hundreds of customers. So Ben, what do you think?
I mean, I think what's going to be coming is more of sort of active reinforcement learning, where your training process doesn't require retraining evolutions per se, but more of an adaptability within effectively a session context, which ChatGPT and DaVinci, they do that.
Pretty much does, yeah.
But there's still, like, you can interact with it and tell it constraints of how you want it to interact with you. So there's this reinforcement learning that's happening in the session. But if I close that session down and then start asking it this, the endpoint questions of where I got to after having a conversation with 400 back and forths, it doesn't understand what I'm saying anymore.
Yes.
Because it was just that session, then it had that context where we built up that chain of, okay, this is what I want you to do for me. So the reinforcement learning aspect of it, I'd say on a global level, taking through some sort of smart evaluation and secure means of not allowing itself to be retrained in a bad way, but take that session information and dynamically update its actual weight parameters in the model. So then you have something that approaches what you could call like general learning, where this machine talking to 1.5 million people a day starts amassing far more knowledge than it can by just reading the web. I think that's the next iteration, is something like that.
Yeah. And generating some sort of opinion maybe somewhere in deep inside the model. That's what would be really fascinating, actually, because at the end nowadays, what we got is like at the end, really, really huge archive of all the data available to the model. But if it could make some kind of opinion finally on the data it would be really interesting. But it's like more like a sci-fi topic, I guess.
Well, I don't know. I mean, sci-fi is getting pretty close to reality. Yeah, but that makes sense. If it has sort of like a reinforcement component where it can learn itself. And ChatGPT's code writing ability is questionable. Like it works, but unclear if it can write giant frameworks. And so if it can start trying to write those frameworks, learning how to write frameworks and iterating upon itself, that would be a really cool
Oh yeah,
next step.
yeah, like a robotic plant producing robots.
Yeah, precisely. Yeah, and it's unclear if there's enough compute power in the universe with this structure to make that be effective. Maybe we need to rethink how the algorithm itself is built. But um, yeah, it's a cool idea for sure.
Would love to live till we see some next step. Hopefully,
Yeah, that shouldn't be too hard.
probably.
Cool. So I had another question, and your background is specifically in sort of iOS development, but then with this new project, you had to take on a bunch of new roles. And with that iOS development, I was wondering how you entered the ML world and thought about hiding complexity from users, because there's a bunch of fancy tech in the back end, and ideally it should just work, just like your experience with GCP. So how do you go about hiding complexity from users?
Well, actually, when I was an iOS dev, I started to use some different kinds of automation tools more and more. First, just to automate build processes, then to launch tests, then we added automation tests. And so I became more and more interested in automation itself, started to write and create more and more complex systems. And machine learning and inference actually stacks very well into this approach. So basically, you create another automation system. So that's why the role of chief technology officer actually felt really natural to me. So for me, it was kind of a challenge quest to create reliable, responsive stack of technology or structure, add the Kubernetes on top of this, and it's really a really good way to go and create applications in 2023, basically.
Yeah, but more on the user experience side. So let's say I go submit a script. There's a bunch of complexity going on. I'm assuming you guys don't allow the user to tune anything or set parameters on how the model should be run. It should just work. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's true. Not in the moment, but well, we have some kind of understanding what the user would need to see in the most, say, default occasion, and we basically show him as easy as possible. So we understood that we work in the industry where the users are not that proficient in technology as we do, so we need to really deliver on one click approach, one click workflows. And for me, it's super important. Like, show the value instantly. That's it.
Speaking of value, does the tool do any sort of inference regarding potential profitability of a script or prediction?
Not yet. Maybe there are solutions on the market who kind of try to predict the profitability, but for me, it's a really complex topic because so much aspects actually affect your end box office of your project. So as for me, it's nearly hard to predict the end outcome, because okay, we predicted that your movie gonna make $1 million, and then the epidemic starts or war starts, and what we're gonna do with our prediction. So in such case, it's better not to operate with real money and real numbers like that. Let's create some kind of rating instead, like
Right.
this movie is like A+ profitable, this one potentially C-. That might work.
So many latent factors affect, how many ticket sales you actually get in what
Absolutely.
region that you're releasing. But yeah, what I was getting at was exactly what you said. Like, hey, on a scale of 1 to 10, we think that, hey, the script that you just submitted is a 1 out of 10. Probably
Yeah.
don't want to go forward with this one
Yeah.
because
And the previous screenplays we rated like A plus made this amount of box office. And probably your screenplay might do something similar, but no guarantee here.
yeah. But armed with that data, you could almost create a profiler where you could give the end user the ability to build a cast, and then you
Yeah,
could dynamically predict
true.
like how much does that change this rating scale.
True. There are actually a company like this. It's called Largo AI, and they are trying to do exactly this, I believe. Good luck.
Yeah. That is not I don't think that's a simple problem to solve, like at all.
For sure.
Yeah, what are the most in demand, potentially automatable components of filmmaking?
It's a good question, actually. I think the creation of a shooting schedule is one of the most tedious and potentially dangerous part, and the most one affecting your budget. So once we find a good way how to connect the schedule with the reality, we're also going to create another wonderful tool for the professionals, because there are so many aspects which affect your schedule, like, I don't know, weather or the change in particular cast situation, like someone got ill or something like this, and it all starts to change by one really quickly. And nowadays there is a special, special departments and producers who just control this aspect of filmmaking.
Yeah, really sort of unsexy thought about this just popped in my head. You could probably automate permit application filing based on the schedule and the locations. So if somebody says, yes, green light this, think about how many hundreds of human hours are wasted on that.
Mm-hmm.
Of like filling out whatever locality required. Like, hey, in order to film in this city, you need this city's permit. And then if it's in America, you need a permit from the state. If it's near the capital, you need like federal approval, and it has to go to these agencies. To have an automated system will say, oh, you're filming in DC. Here's the 37 permits that you need, and I've pre-filled them all for you. Would you like me to submit? And then just submit them all.
That's right. Great idea, actually. I'm going to add it to my list of stolen ideas. Thank you, Ben.
Please take it. But it's stuff like that. That's an application of ML that directly affects profitability. Right. It's not super complex, but it's super useful.
Yeah, and definitely right. Agree.
Yeah. Or stuff like if you're going to go on location to, like, hey, we're going to film in Northern Ireland. Well, how many people are on the cast for that particular shoot? Is that first unit, second unit? And then how many other people go along with the actors that are going to be shooting? So how many rental cars do we need to reserve?
Exactly. So now we're starting to do something really similar. We're integrating a ChatGPT model to our platform in order to like predict you the potential difficult or dangerous parts of your screenplay. Like you have children involved in this particular scene, so you need to follow a particular rule of working with minors. So maybe you have open fire scenes. Definitely want to have a few extinguishers on your set. Maybe there are like animals involved. You want to have animal wranglers, etc., etc. So we're adding like ways to protect you during your planning or even shooting, just to make sure you don't forget something.
Be careful in the liability for that, though.
Yes. No guarantee. Sorry.
Yeah, you have a D+ rating for safety for your set.
Yes, but make sure you double check everything.
Yeah, many years ago, I actually my first job out of the U.S. Navy when I got out was working for a company that makes DVDs and Blu-rays for Hollywood. So part of that job was us flying over to Hollywood every couple of months and meeting with different studio executives. And we'd get these lot tours sometimes. And up until that point, I had no idea how movies were made, like what layperson does. But I remember going into these different sound stages and onto these different sets and seeing it from back while they're filming, and of course being very quiet, not talking at all, but just watching. Like, yeah, there's 3 people in front of the camera that are being filmed, and that's what we see when we watch a movie. And then you look around, you're like, hey, there's 800 people in this building right now.
Yeah.
And it's all of that stuff. Like, each of those people probably have something that they do.
Yeah.
Assuming they're not, I mean, even if they are like a tradesperson, like, hey, they're a gaffer or they're a carpenter. There's things that you could do with machine learning and with NLP and these use cases where you say, okay, you're going to need to build this set, and here's the description of the set that's in the screenplay. How much wood do we need to order? How many nails do we need? You know, how many windows should we order for this house of this type that's described? And you could sort of pre-budget out. Like, this is kind of how much pre-production is going to cost for this.
You're right. Or we have these kind of locations in our database or from our vendors who potentially could rent it for you for this amount of time, and this would cost that amount of money. And to make it look like something in your screenplay, you also probably need these props which you can rent from here, or maybe making this on custom might cost you something like this. Yeah, definitely there are the ways to automate it and kind of predict the budget of limitless.
I remember one of the things that we walked on to, I don't even remember the name of the film, but it was some like pseudo fantasy historical thing. I just remember a lot of people in armor that were on set. And it was like, darkness. It was a bunch of knights that were in suits of armor. And as they moved around after the cameras were off and everything, you could hear that it was actually metal that they're in. It wasn't, full reproduction stuff, but it was metal. And I asked one of the people there that was giving us a tour, I'm like, who builds all that stuff for you? And where'd you get all those swords? And I look over, they point across the room and they're like, oh, look at that weapons rack. I'm like, okay, there's 100 swords there, in groups of 10, like 10 identical and then 10 identical. Like, who builds that stuff? And they're like, well, we hired an armorer to build it all, like an actual blacksmith. I'm like, that couldn't have been cheap. And they're like, no, like each one of those swords is $10,000.
Oh man.
Like, okay. That's a lot of money.
And where you're going to put it after the shooting ended?
There's a lot of things to think about with the cost of all this stuff, and just reading the text on the page gives you that insight if you have that connection.
Yes. True. So much information actually in the screenplay. You can get so much out of it, like to understand. Of course, you can execute different parts in a different way. Like you may have real explosion, or you might have a CGI one 2 days, and it will be absolutely different levels of complexity and valuation, of course.
How do you guys think about expanding into different movie markets? So you're currently mostly in European markets right now, but would you look to expand into sort of American or maybe Bollywood films?
Well, it's actually like 70% of our users are from the US. So in fact, we are work more for American users, individuals at the moment. We are looking for a way to switch to studios and productions finally, because we finally about to get enough momentum to fulfill the more advanced needs of, say, production or a studio working on a custom plans and integration. Also, we got a lot of users from the UK as well as from Europe. Basically, that's because we were limited by the English localization of our platform till now. And that's why, of course, the majority of your users would be English speakers. But technically, we're not limited to English at all. It was just easier for us to support and maintain the system with only one language. Now we are in the process of adding more, going to add European languages. I guess German and French is the first one, and then Latin America with Portuguese and Spanish. And then we're probably going to go to India, because it's, in fact, volume of the market is even bigger than Hollywood. Surprisingly, they shoot much more and much faster, and the amount of money it's just gigantic in India.
Yeah, I bet it's a tough market to crack into, though.
Yeah, but we got really nice guides. They will help us.
So what happens if it becomes the tool becomes so standard and popular that a major American Hollywood film studio says, we want you to just work on our stuff?
Then I'll be probably buy an island somewhere at that moment. Well, I don't know. I'll be super happy. That will be a sign for us that we created something really useful for the industry. Great honor, as for me.
So you would take the deal instead of saying, "Nah, we're gonna grow. We're gonna get bigger ourselves, and we'll handle automation of more of your products."
That was your question, like selling everything to just one single player and not expanding to, not providing our services anymore to the audience. I don't know. The tough question, actually. To be honest, we always treated our tool and wanted it to be as accessible as possible. One of our key mission is to actually democratize the industry and lower the level, the entry level. Let's help indie and the younger generation to do things faster and easier. That's it.
So I know the people on this podcast are very into music. Do you plan on expanding beyond NLP and potentially into audio generation?
We don't have that particular plans, actually. Maybe because I'm a musician and for me it's a sacred thing. I'm not that enthusiastic about music generation, about AI music generation. To me, it all sounds horrible. It just shouldn't exist. It's fun from the scientific and the research perspective, but no, please.
Same thing with stuff like generated scripts. I don't know if you ever read any of those where somebody's like, "Oh, I can type in 3 sentences and it'll write an entire story for me," and you read it and you're like, "This is definitely not written by a human," or it's written by somebody who has no idea what they're doing. You find out, it's an AI that wrote it. It's like, okay, clever, but it sucks. Yeah. Same thing with music. It's like it learns patterns. And it takes like a mathematical approach to music.
Yes, but music is about breaking patterns.
Exactly. So there's no passion in it.
Absolutely.
It can be technically correct. It's like, okay, it's like listening to a professional musician play through beginner intro lessons of doing scales. It's like, okay, you can do a 1-4-5-1 chord progression all day long.
That challenging. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we're about at time, so I'll quickly wrap. So today we were talking with Ruslan about the use of machine learning in parsing film scripts to determine things like location and such, and then building tools on top of that. So essentially extracting information from scripts and then leveraging that information to make the film shooting process easier. And they have been using BERT in the GCP system with Kubernetes, and that's a very, very solid tech stack. And then one thing that stuck out to me also is that as we were talking about building these initial training sets, when you're working in a novel space, there aren't pre-configured data sets. So you usually have to go in and manually label data, and ideally you'll outsource that. But Ruslan hit on a really important point, which is if you actually manual label data, you learn a lot about the use case, about the edge cases, and about all the weird quirks that are in that specific industry. And then finally, it was really cool to hear about how they selected the model, basically reading docs and making it simple to use, but also looking at how it performed relative to other models is super relevant. And then Ben also mentioned model size. If you're looking to serve and serve cheaply, model size is definitely a consideration. So Ruslan, if people want to get in contact, where can they find you?
The best way to find me, I think, is LinkedIn. So you look for our company called Film Stage, or me in particular, Ruslan K. You can find me on our company website. So shoot me an email also. would love to hear from anyone interested in our stuff or in machine learning or anything else. Ruslan at filmustage.com. Please feel free to contact me.
Well, thanks so much. Until next time, it's been Michael Burke and my co-host,
Ben Wilson.
and have a good day, everyone.
Take it easy.
Bye-bye. Take care.